Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of For Us Therapeutics with your host. I'm Dr. B.
Dr. LaKeith.
Dr. Gigi.
And before we get into today's episode, as usual, we would like you to like, comment, subscribe, click the little bell notification icon on your screen so that way you can get updates when a new episode drops. In today's topic, we're going to talk about black fatigue. And I'm going to be honest with everybody. I'm tired. With everything going on, I am very, very tired. So we thought it'd be a good idea to discuss this topic. And before we start, I would like to give an actual working definition that we found online or that I found online doing research on what exactly is black fatigue. So black fatigue refers to the cumulative emotional, psychological, and physiological toll experienced by black individuals from daily exposure to systemic racism, microaggressions, and racial trauma. It is more than just stress, everybody. I need you to know that it's more than just stress. It is chronic exhaustion rooted in racialized and racial trauma. Stressors that never have been fully resolved. It mirrors racial battle fatigue, described by scholars like Smith, and there's a bunch of researchers that come after that, where black people report emotional withdrawal, hypervigilance, anxiety, and psychological exhaustion due to sustained racism. So everybody, that is the working definition that we're going to use as we talk about black fatigue. And if I could be honest with you, this is more of a generational thing, in my opinion, because everybody wants to say that, oh, slavery, Jim Crow, nowadays, even the stuff that happened in the 90s during the Reagan era, all that was so long ago. And it's not. It's really not that long ago. It's one grandparent and then their grandparent. That's how far long ago it usually is. But this sounds more like a generational, continuous, and ongoing thing. Anytime that, in my opinion, we seem to be making progress towards the right direction, towards healthy mental health for minorities, specifically black people, we always end up taking 10 steps back.
And that contributes to black fatigue, right?
Very much so. I'm tired. I am tired. So either one of you can go first. Since that it's considered a generational thing, or it's a chronic thing, so it's not just stress. It is a chronic, ongoing response to systemic racism, microaggressions, and all the other stresses such as racial trauma that come from that. And in our collective professional opinion, whoever wants to go first, how do you feel that's going to impact the black psyche or a black person?
Well, I feel as though it's, I hate to say this, if you are a black person in America, it has always penetrated your psyche. Always. It's never not. It is us having to police ourselves and our personhood, how we talk, how we dress, how we present in certain spaces. It's a thing that we teach our children, and then they end up teaching their children. The things that they teach their children end up teaching their children. It just goes on and on and on. And when you have to teach yourself for the broader American society, it just makes you tired. It's the reason why we even came up with the whole term of code switching, because we recognized how we showed up in those spaces versus how we showed up with each other. It had to be different because we understood the cultural context of blackness and all the things that encompassed, and all the experiences that encompassed, to where so when we went out into the broader world, we knew that they didn't get it. And we still see that to this day. When we talk about microaggressions, when we talk about racism, we get gaslit and told, like, that's not what it is. You guys always want to play the race card. You guys always want to be the victim. To whereas that when we go out to the world, we try not to have too much of those conversations unless you have a particular ideology or a particular platform. But then when we amongst ourselves, we end up letting it out, a sigh of relief, and just say, like, they gave that position to another white man. Or recently having a conversation with one of my black female colleagues is saying it's devastating watching that 7.5% of the unemployment that happened amongst black women because of this massive layoff of the civil service in the United States government compared to like the 4.3 that exists for the rest of the country. Yeah. Having those type of conversations where it's like, I can't have that conversation at work. I have to have that conversation with like my friends, with my girlfriends, with my family. I can't have that conversation, the implications of that. Why? Because if you have that conversation now in a very open space, you didn't get met with visceral and get hit with the with the BS of reverse racism, as in like, oh, you're trying to racialize this, like this doesn't impact other people, like other people aren't being unemployed, you just trying to make it all about you and your blackness. And it's like, well, my blackness, whether you like it or not,
Plays a
statistically
factor.
plays a factor in the disproportionality of why is it that more black women find themselves dealing with unemployment than anybody else, even though they are more likely to work just as hard, if not harder, than anybody else.
Yeah, when you said the policing thing, that really struck a chord with me, because you're 1,000% correct. The only reason that we're policing ourselves up is because we've been conditioned to believe, or the American society has been conditioned to believe, that black is whatever X negative adjective comes after. Ghetto, deviant, unprofessional, just violent. Just the notion surrounding black women's hair is a historical situation in and of itself. For instance, women couldn't have locks at work, which we used to call dreadlocks, which I'm glad we changed the name to locks, because it was looked as being unprofessional. Certain hairstyles are being deemed as unprofessional. You can't, African American vernacular, you can't talk like that at work. You're being quote unquote loud. We don't use that terminology. The policing of yourself is a form of a defense mechanism in reaction to trying to survive your workspace, trying to survive being in X environment, whether it's networking, going to a restaurant, things like that. That's very, very stressful, because I can't be me. I have to literally put on a mask. Now, granted, I know we have different identities, right? We as black people, we know, like, there are certain spaces where, even as among black people, we could be honest with ourselves, but we also know, like, all right, man, you ain't got to bring that foolishness in here. Like, we stop acting like that. But it's different when you're in your workspace and you're surrounded by your white coworkers, for example, where you know that they've done studies where, when you ask people that are considered a minority group, especially black people, describe yourself, one of the first things that comes up is their race. When they do the same thing with white people, their race and ethnicity never come up. So we know from gleaning from that is that, well, everybody in this room has felt this. When you're in a certain space, you are a representative of your entire race or ethnic group. Whereas white people, by and large, have the luxury, because they're the majority. They know that, well, I don't represent the entire white population. I am an individual. But black people, when we get into certain positions where we don't see a lot of black people, we know that I have to be the representation of my people. Because if I fail, we always think this in our head that, well, won't let none of them in here no more. That was a failed experiment.
Yeah. But I think when whiteness is centered as like the standard of humanity here in the country we live in, that's the standard. And so if we are operating from a space of difference, right, like the standard says that you should speak in a certain way and you should wear your hair long and straight, or you should even down to like how your clothing fits as a woman, right? Like my clothes are not going to fit the same way as Becky's clothes may fit, because my body is not shaped the same way. So when whiteness is centered as the standard, everything else that comes after that, it didn't come after that, but everything else that comes in addition to that is somehow lacking. And so you find yourself constantly in this space of policing yourself because you're trying to fit a standard that other people have set. And it is not. It's not our standard.
No, I agree. I like how you broke that down, because that segues into the next question, but I want to take what you said and put it in different terms. This is the exact same thing. There's these things called survival thrusts, as I like to call them. I got it from Dr. Kobe Kimbone. May he rest in peace. He died years ago. He's a famous African-American psychologist. And he talks about that. He says that in the American culture, it is a Western Christian European culture. Therefore, there is a thrust towards the perpetuation of that culture, that society, that mindset. Everything that's wrapped in the culture is the way you dress, the way you talk, the way you look at the world, basically your entire worldview, your religion, ideology, things like that. All of that is wrapped into the American identity. Well, black people have a different survival thrust. Even if you look at black people and white people in America, we have different ancestry. They have a European survival thrust, and then we have an African survival thrust. Matter of fact, a foundational part of American politics still comes from Europe. When they wrote out the Constitution, when they did certain things, that foundation is wrapped in there as well. Yeah. In that thrust, if using what you said being the example you gave, if the European thrust is considered the normal thrust for that culture to go forward, then ours would, within that framework, be deviant because we have a different culture. Even though we grew up in America, we have different needs. We have a different experience. We have a different struggle. We worship the same God. If you're Christian, you will worship the same God, but we worship in a different way. We listen to music in a different way. So therefore, it's not so far, but it's left or right of what would be considered the core thrust that you would look at it and go, well, no, that's too different than mine. Therefore, there's a clash. Therefore, within that clash, well, then you're not matching what is considered to be the dominant thrust. Therefore, yours must be deviant. And to your point, I think that is what people run into all the time, where America was not founded with the mindset of the three of us sitting here. It wasn't founded on the premise that the three of us would be as educated as we are, as free as we are, where we are today. Therefore, with that being the case, there were certain things that were put in place to help those who look like the founding fathers. And then as time has progressed and gone forward, we've changed the way that we do things, but the core thrust of things are still there. Racism.
Yeah.
Racism and white supremacy is ultimately, everybody, what I'm getting at. It was founded on racism. It was founded on white supremacy. It is rooted in it, and we see it in modern day times. Y'all mind if I go to the next question and definition, or anybody want to share anything first? Because I thought that what you said was a really, really good segue to the difference between racism and white supremacy. So, everybody, I am a big fan, Dr. B is a big fan of defining terms. I hate when we co-inflate or correlate terms because it irritates me. Brian, do not like when white people say, well, black people are being racist. No, it is not the same thing. To be racist, and racism requires power in a system that benefits a large group of people. You can be black and be prejudiced. You can be black and discriminate. Black people cannot be racist because we're not in a position of economical or numerical majority to influence policies that benefit our people. That is why you have to know your terms. You can be prejudiced, you can discriminate, but you cannot be racist. It's not possible because you lack that power. Racism. Let me make sure I get to my notes because looking at the camera kind of threw me off a little bit. Here we go. Racism is a system that uses prejudice and power to marginalize specific racial groups. Therefore, in order to be racist, you have to have a mindset of racism and you have to have power to marginalize, meaning affect, denigrate, and put at a disadvantage racialized groups. White supremacy is the belief system and structural ideology that normalizes and privileges whiteness across institutions, meaning across the institutions that affect the country or people. So white supremacy is an ideology that affects institutions that are currently in play. Institutions that are currently in play control our media, control our military, our education system, our healthcare system, our financial system, our judicial system, every other system that we have in play. So therefore, you have an ideology permeated in those systems by those who are in power, who may in fact have racist mindsets. So racism is power-based with prejudice. White supremacy is an ideology used to perpetuate the privilege of whiteness. Now, with that being said, how does this contribute to black fatigue? Going back to some of the stuff that we talked, I know I saw your eyes light up right there. I gave a lot of definitions right there because I want y'all to know that we're not just making this up. Right? I went and did a lot of research, not making this up at all. I like how your eyes lit up because it was like, yeah, how is it connected to it? Everybody, going back to some of the things that we've already touched on. Policing of ourselves, how certain policies disproportionately impact black people and black women more than anything else. literally having to worry about how you look, how you dress. These are the things that are permeated by a dominant culture. Okay, it's not a victim mindset. That is not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is you cannot, well, you can do whatever you want. You have a right as a human being. But I think that it's wild and wildly irresponsible and rather weird to get upset by me as a black person pointing out racism or a culturally perpetuating issue that disproportionately affects people. But back to the original premise of how does it impact black fatigue? Black people have to find a way to be black while navigating in these spaces without being targeted. What do you mean by targeted? Because like you said, Keith, the people like to say black people always make it about race. No, actually, we don't. In my honest professional and personal opinion, I don't make it about race. I just want you to leave me alone and let me do what I do. But when I notice that I am being targeted, whether it's for a lack of promotion, whether you're following me in the store, whether you're staring at me while I'm down the street, whether you live in the middle of Midwest Bubbleville, nowhere, you've never seen a black person before, and I'm pointing out, mighty odd that all these other people walking around and you staring at me. Is it the hat? Is it the glasses? No, it's the melanin in my skin. That is the example that I am offering to you. That when we go into these spaces, we have to police ourselves to avoid extra scrutiny, extra judgment, extra targeting, all these other things. And then we have to fight tooth and nail to even get into certain spaces. Literally to get to the top of certain fields. There are so many industries out there where there's a lack of diversity in and of itself. And even when it is diverse, some of them don't even have black people in them. Sorry, I went on a rant right there, everybody. I just wanted to share that. That is, in my opinion, one of the ways, there's multitude of ways of how racism and white supremacy contribute to black fatigue. I get tired. What? We've tried multiple times throughout history to just be left alone. Please help me if I forget something. Seneca Valley, which became Central Park. Lake Lanier. Rosewood. I always mess this one up. Is it South Carolina or North Carolina?
I think Rosewood was actually in Florida.
So Rosewood. Of course, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Just Google the Red Summer. Like I said before, if you're curious about like all the times that black people were just by themselves and all of a sudden racism came in and just curtailed everything they were doing. We get tired of, we just want to be left alone. We just want to do for ourselves, take care of our community. And then here comes a policy or a person or law enforcement coming in to kick over and flip over the table that we're doing. Well, Brian, that doesn't happen all the time, does it? No, actually it does. There are policies that will get written into law that will disproportionately affect black communities. Black communities, by and large, are food deserts for a reason. Everybody, a food desert is where there is a lack of adequate access to a grocery store. Most black neighborhoods in America were designed to not have them there. If you go to most black neighborhoods in America, there are no major hospitals there. There's no major opportunities. They are literal ghettos where they siloed all the black people in, kept all the resources out, and then got mad when violence broke out. I'm sorry, I'm elevating my voice. I'm just, I got a little black fatigue right now. I'm going to let my co-host talk right now. I'm so sorry. Go ahead, everybody. What are your thoughts?
Passionate. So when we're talking about white supremacy,
I thought you was going to be the passionate one in this episode.
Well, look, I'm fatigued. I'm a black man fatigued.
I feel you. Go right ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sucking up the oxygen.
But no, to your point, when we're talking about white supremacy and we're talking about, because me personally, white supremacy, institutional racism, very much intertwined.
Yeah, very much so. You can't have, in my opinion, you can't have one without. I'm sucking up the oxygen again. I'm sorry.
But in this particular era, and I'll talk about the particular era that we're in, although there are plenty of eras in these United States of America history that you could pinpoint, but I'll focus on a particular era of, as we were discussing beforehand, anti-intellectualism. when you try to present things with the data, with the facts, with the research, you don't get met with critical thinkers who challenge it based off of like their own critical analysis. You get met with a whole bunch of free thinkers.
Of course.
People who don't want to face the realities of, well, if America is indeed racist or sexist or homophobic, what does that say about me if I look like the people that are in the position that get the privilege or the power? So, for instance, to your point, when you talk about certain policies that impact particularly Black people disproportionately, one of the conversations we're having now that isn't getting enough, I think, traction as far as I listen to in the media is a lot of these states and also the powers that be right now, the District of Columbia, trying to get rid of cash bail.
Yeah.
So when you hear that, particularly if you're on a particular side or you come from a certain social economic background, you think to yourself, well, no, that's a good thing. It keeps the criminals off the street and it keeps them locked up longer. No. Cash bail disproportionately hurts Black people and it disproportionately hurts poor people. To where so it's difficult to put up 3,000, 2,000, whatever the percentage is. Usually I think about 10% of whatever the overall fine is in order to get out of prison. And the sad thing is the majority of people who end up having to sit in prison because they can't pay for it, they don't get the speedy trial that they deserve.
Right.
They don't get the speedy trial that's a part of their rights, right? They will literally sit in prison or jail for months, if not years. Because of why? Oh, well, the judge got sick, so we have to push back. Oh, the prosecutor needs more time, so we have to push it back. Oh, their lawyer wasn't available, so we have to push it back. Push back. And while all that time is going by, this person who we have not even identified whether or not they are guilty or not is being incarcerated.
Yes.
And to a certain extent, also probably being tortured. Because let's be honest, America's prisons, or any prison for that matter around the world, isn't known to be like a 5-star hotel.
No, not at all. And not to mention it disproportionately impacts one community, which is another thing where I hate when people always try to quote this ridiculous study of Black people commit the majority of the violent crimes. It's a ridiculous study because if you put things in context, Black people are statistically more likely to be arrested. Black people are more likely to have their rights violated during an arrest. Not to suck up all the oxygen again. The history of law enforcement in America with the Black community has always been tumultuous. Sorry about that. I'm a little fatigued, my daggone self. Therefore, when there are certain policies, because you use that example, in a criminal justice system that comes out, it is by and large going to negatively impact Black people because we deal with over surveillance, over policing, and we deal with lack of opportunities and resources in our own communities. We talked about, and to your point, we also did talk, I want to say we talked about that, Keith, that what you had just said, that one reason why we believe that racism won't go anywhere is because if you are a white American, of course you love the identity of America because you see yourself written throughout the analogs of history. It's literally tailored towards you. But then here comes Black people saying, well, no, what about this incident, that incident? What about these policies? What about this person? Literally, one of the favorite thing that a lot of people like to bring up is, hey, well, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. Black people, we tend to say, yeah, reluctantly. Did you not listen to the speech? He said, if I hadn't any other way, I would have used that option. I'm paraphrasing it a little bit. At a certain point, it's kind of like what you were saying is the dissonance kicks in. Well, I'm not like that. That's cool that you're not like that. I'm not saying that you are like that. What I am saying is you're benefiting from it. You don't do nothing to address it. And you're perpetuating it. You're literally perpetuating it right now. How am I perpetuating it? You don't vote for people who plan to change it. You don't implement certain things that will change it. So by and large, to your point, I wanted to say that because we've talked about that before, that the identity of your country and your culture, you take it on. And then when it's challenged, people often can't separate the two. They go, well, you're talking about me. No, I'm talking about America, but you are identified as an American, so I'm not addressing anything to you. I'm just saying it to try to correct it.
And listening to that, this particular iteration of the white backlash, I'll call spade a spade, that we're experiencing is very much rooted in a way that hasn't been rooted before, which is this. Prior, white backlash was more so rooted in this fear of minority groups, particularly Black people, being conceived or possibly having as much power equal to, right? So it was very much in this context of like, okay, power. And to a certain extent, one could argue that it still is. But now, if you want to say the cover for it is more so kind of like, well, we don't think that it's fair that we should be made to be villainized. Sorry, that is fatigue, or made to feel bad about things that happened so long ago that we didn't necessarily have anything to do with. So now the response to that is, well, we want to curate history in a way that doesn't paint America as this big, bad, negative experience for some people. And we want to kind of, not necessarily completely rewrite it, but we want to make it seem like, well, there were people that lived on the plantation that just kind of helped. They just kind of helped. And so now, and that's why I said like this anti-intellectual era where you're like thinking to yourself, so now we're trying to reimagine what slavery was and just completely forget the historical context behind it, all the photos, all the writings and narratives, both from the people who own slaves, white people who are trying to free slaves, and the slaves themselves, and try to sell this in a way because we're concerned, and I say this because it's the only population I think it could serve, we're concerned about making white children feel guilty about what happened. And I know we said this before in the previous podcast. I always think about what Brother Ibrahim X said when all this was happening. He says that that's very telling because his whole argument is, I don't understand why you guys wouldn't think that your white children would not identify with the abolitionists.
Yeah, I remember that.
If the first thing you're going to is that, it's going to make them feel guilty and we don't think that's fair, why are we not, okay, if you're concerned about that, why are you not also telling the story of the abolitionists? John Brown was one of the few white men that was right and died. And literally, that man died.
He did die. He got hung.
We talk about that, but we don't. We don't promote him. We don't talk about him and other people just like him who were very essential to us gaining freedom and rights. We just kind of focus on this fear, this white fear of, now we're going to be painted as these villains and we're tired of being villainized. So now we want to completely change the game book once again and write a completely different story. Or maybe to a certain extent one could argue the same old story.
Okay, fair enough. So these are some of the areas in which we tend to deal with it. And it's different for different people. Like the things that we're talking about manifest differently based upon where you are as a black person. And for our white audience members that are watching, you might not know that these things manifest in certain ways. Like we all have different experiences, whether we're at work, whether we're going to even to the weight room sometimes. You might just feel out of place as a black person sometimes. So I want to touch on the difference between prejudice and discrimination in order for us to keep up the conversation real quick. So let me get to my notes. Where did I put it at, everybody? Hold on. That's racism, white supremacy. That's why we got a control find button for a reason. There we go. So, prejudice is an internal bias. It's the way that we think about something. It's the way that we're looking at reality and processing it in our head. It's an internal bias, while discrimination is the power to act on it. So it's the action. A shorthand way of me thinking about it is always, prejudice is in the mind. It's what you think about something. Discrimination is an act. So remember how I said earlier that I'm a big fan of defining terms, right? You should not conflate white racism with black discrimination. Like what I did there, how I brought it all back together for everybody. Yeah, you should never conflate white racism, which is rooted in power and prejudice, with black discrimination, which is merely rooted in prejudice and action. If a black person chooses not to hire a bunch of white people, that is not racist. That type of act right there does not have the power to change the trajectory of white people. He's just being discriminatory and he's breaking the law and should be held accountable accordingly, right? However, if a white Fortune 500 company decides to never hire black people, yes, that has a power play dynamic to it. Notice why I changed the scenario, because most black businesses are not Fortune 500 companies. If a black bank decides not to give certain loans to black people, then it has a negative impact on the black community. That is why I often like to define terms and not conflate certain terms. But it doesn't always need to be that broad. You can even find it in small spaces, in day-to-day spaces.
Yeah, and I think it's important to normalize that we all have personal bias. And I think that sometimes the resistance to having these conversations with people of different races or cultural backgrounds is that, as you mentioned earlier, people start to feel attacked, right?
Yeah.
They start to feel as though something that happens naturally for most people, we all have internal bias. And normalizing that that's okay. Normalizing that the bias is something that occurs naturally in the brain. The schemas of the
Yes, it
brain, the
does.
stereotyping of the brain, that's how our brain understands and processes information, period. And then if you move on to act on that in a way that holds other people back and harms other people, that is a different action. You've gone from having a thought to having an action, and you have control over the actions that you enact on other people around you. So I think that's an important part of the conversation that might get more people to the table to actually participate in the conversation. Because it's amazing to have a conversation in safe spaces like this. It's amazing to look at you two Black men, educated in this field. But I know to a certain extent what your experience has been, right? Because it's very reflective of my own or my father or my brothers, et cetera. But it's so important that we get other voices to participate in this conversation and not shy away from it. And I think sometimes the basis of that is just acknowledging and normalizing that we all have some internal bias.
Correct. Put it this way. One of the things I always like to tell people about mental health is understanding, one, how your mental health is shaped by the society that you live in, right? So every human being has bias. There's no way getting around that. Usually your bias is shaped by the culture that you grow up in, right? So what bias may look like here in the United States of America may look different than what may look like in Ghana, which may look different than what it looks like in Brazil, which means looks different than how it looks in China. But it's there because we all grow up in different societies that instill certain morals and values within us that says, well, this is good, this is bad, you want to be this way, don't want to be that way. And sometimes those morals and those values they instill in us are problematic and wrong. And then we internalize it. And when we internalize it, it becomes a source of like rage or shame. Because I feel as though when you feel shame, it either comes in the form of, when you feel shame, it either comes in the form of rage or sadness or depression. So usually people, when they're raging out against other people, I'm always thinking to myself, particularly if they're just hyper-focused on one group, I'm always thinking to myself, what are you feeling so insecure and ashamed about? Or for people who are feeling more depressed about it, it's like, well, what is it about this identity or this experience that has you feeling this way? And 9 times out of 10, it's other people's stuff that got put into us. And for a lot of Black people, we're talking about Black fatigue in particular, we're talking about other things that a dominant culture has put on us that we have to navigate on a daily basis, negotiate on a daily basis. When you wake up and you listen to the radio, when you watching the news, when you go into work, when you go to the grocery store. And it always perplexes me when we have these conversations and people say like, well, you guys are just so hyper-focused on race and everything's about race, when nobody wants to take the moment to realize or pause, particularly on one side, that, but you create the narrative of race. People who look like us did not come up with this concept to call themselves Black. People like us did not come with this concept of like, well, let's just kind of separate people. People like us who look like us didn't say like, well, let's put this color, this group of people of this color, of this background into bondage. And then from there, had that become the narrative of this new culture that they're forced to build amongst each other. And then carry it through the centuries and then wonder why are you guys so focused on race? Like, we've done everything we could possibly do. We've ended slavery. We signed the Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Bill. You guys should be over that. Why can't you guys let that go? It's because it's the fact that the box that you guys put us in, those are the only walls that we see. And now that we talk about it, how confining those boxes are, how they've shaped our realities, all of a sudden it's like, you guys are race baiting. You guys are just trying to be victims. When the reality is, again, you put us in that box.
Right. But I think you made a great point earlier about our lived experiences currently in our age group, but our parents and our grandparents, and I mean, these are family members that you grow up in the same home, and their life experiences, their lived experiences have been drastically different in some ways, but the themes are very similar. And you would have to be a person that just refuses to think if you can't look around in our culture and climate that's happening currently right now today and see some of the same themes. blatantly out loud, and some of them are a little more covert. But
Yes.
you have no choice but to think about how living in the skin that you were born in affects you on an everyday basis, from policies to just being safe.
To your point, what you said as far as like the people that came before us and our current times and how it's affecting us and how we have lived different lived experiences. I want everybody to know that racism has been proven to accelerate your biological age due to the chronic stress and the fatigue. And then younger generations take on the mantle or the torch of the trauma and the fight to have the same freedoms that they're looking for. Or when I say freedoms, everybody, I'm more so talking about rights. Rights for self-determination. Rights in order to go out and just the things that we were talking about earlier. Just be on my own and do my own thing without anything getting in the way. But what I want everybody to know is from a biological and psychological standpoint, having to navigate racism ages you. You have your chronological age and your biological age. They often do not match. Like some people could be 35 years old, but have the body of a 28-year-old or a 30-year-old because they work. Racism tends to accelerate your biological age. You could be 30 years old, but have the respiratory system on the body of a 35-year-old person. You know how older people always say, man, I'm just tired.
Yeah.
I'm just tired. Think about that. Tired from what? It's the same thing. It's a rerun going on. It's just what it is. It's the same things that are happening over and over and over again. And it's in the same categories. You usually see it show up in education systems, criminal justice systems, financial institutions, the military, politics. You see it rear its head in these things, and then when the media gets a hold of it, it's literally you either can't trust it, or it's the watered down version, or they're just flat out lying to us about certain things, lying to our very faces. Which this is a segue to the next thing, because one thing, so when I went into the study, I went into did the research for everybody here so we could talk about this, is that the symptoms of black fatigue that tend to show up in clients when they come to therapy tend to be chronic fatigue despite having enough sleep, low mood and irritability, anxiety, especially social or workplace related, especially in the current times when unemployment is going up and job opportunities are low, hypervigilance, imposter syndrome, and emotional numbness. All three of us are licensed mental health providers. Have y'all seen this show up in your therapy sessions these days?
Oh, yes. First off, the laying off of the civil service for the federal government, which is the biggest employer in the Washington metropolitan area.
Very much so.
And as much as people forget, is actually one of the biggest employers of black people, right? And specifically black women, because one component that no one talks about is one of the reasons why black women showed up in droves in the civil service or federal government was because they were iced out of private sector for so long, but they had education. They had the skill set. So a good number, I won't say majority, but a good number of black women went into the civil service, right? And spent years and years building career, working hard. And so now that we've had these massive layoffs, the majority of my government workers who have faced that have been black women. If I think about my caseload now, it's about 5 black women to 1 black man. And so having conversations around that, the fatigue of having to go out here and try to find jobs in a market where it's actually shrinking. And having to go out there and prove your worth, or not sell your worth, but prove your worth and show that, okay, I have this experience. It gets very exhausting. And then to create a safe space in therapy to have that conversation about the racial component of it, right? And what that looks like and what that feels like becomes very, put this way, it becomes very powerful, because nowhere else does that get to happen in the way that it happens in a therapy session, where we understand the data, the research behind it, the implications of it, and what it could do to a mind, what it could do to a body.
Yeah. And then we get to end the session and go out and still live in our blackness.
Yes.
And still experience the chronic fatigue that is to exist in our skin, and it carries on into our social circles, and the conversations that you're having there carries on into family dynamics and the conversations you're having there. So where is there a reprieve? There's not a reprieve. We're constantly in spaces, and even in my professor role, it's so interesting to see the Black students that gravitate towards the Black faculty because we're so underrepresented on staff, right?
Oh, yeah.
So they seek you out and they want that additional mentorship and the additional support. And of course, it's not accounted for in your service to the university, right? But that is definitely part of the culture, part of the Black community. You're going to have those conversations and schedule those appointments. But my point in saying all that is back to the top of the podcast. Black fatigue is chronic, and it exists in every space that we are entering into because there is no space that you hang up your Blackness. It exists everywhere you go, and that can become exhausting.
No, I like how you worded that because you're right. It is definitely chronic because you can't hang up your Blackness. I love how you phrased it because it's everybody want to be Black till it's time to be Black. Everybody want to come to the cookout till it's time to start cooking. And I see you about to say, what do you want to say, Keith? Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt. Huh?
No, I put it this way. You're 100% correct. We give flavor. We give
Of course,
energy. We give trends to this country, to the world. But when it comes down to talk about some real Black issues and really being down with the cause, no, we good. We like your hair, we like your music, but we ain't trying to ride that deep.
I always phrase it as they love the art and the culture that comes out of our struggle, but they don't want to do nothing about it.
Of course not.
Because then, to what we were saying earlier, well, if I do something about it and I'm admitting to it, and I don't really feel like I don't want to go on a tangent, but yeah, they love what comes out of our struggle. They just don't love that the people who are struggling. And so in my therapy sessions, when you two were talking about that, it made me think about, there were two clients that came to mind. One, he logged in this week and he just looked exhausted. And I said, you're not in your usual chipper mood. What's going on? He said, Brian, I'm tired of looking at the news. And he's like, I'm tired of looking at the news. I'm tired of seeing what's going on, how they're playing in our faces day to day. Because he's worried that ultimately the policies that are being put in place is going to come down to him it's going to affect him on a personal level as a Black man, as a Black gay man at that as well. He knows it's going to come down and affect him. And he was talking about that during therapy session. Another one, a Black female, she just had a kid. She came in with a low mood. She's tired of her job. She's tired of listening to people being emboldened to say some of the most ridiculously racist things at her job that has got her mood all low, but she's very irritable. She just tries to isolate and stay to herself at work. These are the ways that they're showing up, in those two examples that they're showing up in a therapy session, that we see how the outside world can affect your personal life, and then you bring it right to therapy. And one thing I really advocate for everybody listening, you don't have to have a major mental health disorder or crisis to come to therapy. You can come to therapy before it gets to that point. It doesn't mean that you have you're mentally ill, there's something severely wrong to you. Life kicks you in the teeth. And before it gets to that point, therapy is you putting your mouth guard in, lacing up your gloves, getting ready to punch it back. So I want to make it clear that you don't have to wait till it cascades, slips, and slopes off the cliff. You can come long before. If you see that you're on this roller coaster or you're in this vehicle and the detour is going in that direction, you can go to therapy right there. Hey, I feel something coming on. I feel like I'm slipping into it, or I'm getting there and I just want to talk to somebody to process. So I just want to say that to everybody, that you can come to therapy long before you get to that point. And it doesn't mean that there's something majorly wrong with you. The other thing I wanted to talk about, because I know that we've talked about this before, what is your thoughts on emotional numbness? Just out of curiosity, whether you have an opinion or not, that because I know that the question's rooted towards how do our clients show up?
Yeah.
But as clinicians, for the purpose of those who are listening and watching, what are your thoughts on emotional numbness as highly educated professionals that we are in this field who try to tend to mend and heal the Black community, but we see what's going on in the world? What are your thoughts about emotional numbness?
Emotional numbness is a coping and survival mechanism that when it stays on longer than it's supposed to, it becomes a hindrance.
100%.
So when you're dealing with traumatic experiences, painful experiences, that emotional numbness protects you because you still have the responsibilities that you have to deal with, your family, your self-care, your other responsibilities, and particularly when you're going through traumatic situations. When that particular coping mechanism then becomes ingrained in your identity and your practices as a person, that's when it crosses the thresholds and becomes a hindrance. Because now you're emotionally numbing to situations where you need to be emotionally available.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly in America, that emotional numbness comes into play to the point about media and what your client was experiencing, is that we get exposed to some of the most terrible, horrific things that either people can do or say to each other, not just in the United States, but around the world. And then we develop an emotional numbness to it. A mass shooting.
And I find that to be crazy. 'Cause
It's tragic.
I'm not getting numb to disrespect. I'm so sorry. You would never. Because when you said it, you were spot on, right? Like, people just get desensitized so quickly. And you were right. I was just saying, for me, everybody, I will never get numb to disrespect. It ain't happening. I'm so sorry. It's just, it won't.
And you shouldn't. I put it this way. For people who put on that numbness as a coping mechanism, and speaking to power, in this particular era now, where we have an administration that does anything that it wants to do, and to a certain extent gets carte blanche to do whatever it wants to do, there has to be a certain level of emotional numbness to the things that they say and do, for the simple fact that if you really sat there and thought about it and really listened to the news cycle over and over again, you would be in a constant state of just anger. And I'm not just talking about the type of anger where it's just like, oh man, fuck them. I'm talking about the type of anger where it's like, you want to burn stuff down.
Yeah.
You want to burn stuff down
that's a
because
good
you just
point.
feel that enraged, and not even just enraged, to a certain extent, depending on what's being said and the rights that get pulled back, you feel degraded. You feel completely degraded. And you have to have some numbness to it, because if you don't, you lose your mind and you have to protect yourself. Now, that applies to those situations. The problem is with emotional numbness too, and I'm sorry to hog out to just say this quickly, is that emotional numbness to a certain extent gives birth to complacency.
Yes, it does.
So the things that we're supposed to get riled up about and that we should be advocating and fighting for, we spent so long just being emotionally numb that when it happens, it's like, oh, that's terrible. And especially in America, where it's just like one tragedy takes a sting out of another tragedy, which takes a sting out of another tragedy. So you don't really have enough time to actually really understand your emotion behind it, because the next thing you know, it's another shooting, it's another right being taken away, it's another ridiculous thing occurring, and you don't have enough time to really kind of sit with the emotion to respond effectively.
Fair enough. What are your thoughts, Dr. Ben?
Fully agree. I think that emotional numbness can be used as a tool to cope and process day to day. But to your point, there has to be a space where you stop and you pause and you intentionally process your thoughts and your feelings, because it will resurface in some way,
Yes, it
right?
will.
You can't say numb forever. And I think some of the most horrendous things we've seen happen, usually episodes of violence, are usually an occurrence to emotional numbness wearing off, right? And you don't
That's
really
a good
necessarily
point.
know the time, the day, the hour, but when it wears off and you've been holding all these things in because you're not taking the time to process or feel them, and when it comes out in a dangerous way, that's not good for anybody. So is it a tool to allow us to survive crazy media cycles, things that we need time to process and have other responsibilities? Yes. But we also then have the responsibility to ourselves to stop and process, feel the feels, and figure out what it is we need to do, whether it's something that we actually can do or creating a safe space with clinicians like ourselves to talk about that stuff.
And because, I always think about things in the lens of systems and culture. And it doesn't help when you're a part of a culture that reinforces and supports that as a strength.
Yes.
Let's be honest. America, in its way, reinforce emotional numbness as a strength.
Yeah, you're
As
supposed to
in-
be more logical than emotional.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or to a certain extent, not even logical. Because the funny thing is, we demonstrate our emotional numbness in situations where we need to be emotional, and in situations where we don't need to be emotional, we're overly emotional.
Like football games.
Yes.
Which I get.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
I agree.
yeah, that's a good point.
Not knocking sports, but we will do that, and America does a wonderful job to where so it rewards you in the situations where you're emotionally numb, I should say, when you should actually be emotional, and then punish you or ridicule you or shame you when you're being emotional about situations that you should. Well, you're emotional about situations that you should be emotional about, and so we have this culture that sends us this messaging that really messes with us. So the way I think that a lot of people find themselves in a place where it's like, I think I just kind of stay in the middle, just kind of like that numbness, because if you're a man, and particularly if you're a black man, and you're crying about something, toughen up.
Okay. I do want to give everybody this for those who are watching, so that way you can have this to take with you. Because we talked about these different topics: black fatigue, racism versus white supremacy, prejudice versus discrimination, how they manifest in the therapy room, how they manifest in day-to-day lives. Then what's the healing and what does resistance against it look like? Because mental health isn't just coming to talk to a therapist, it's building up the resistance and the flexibility in the face of stress and all the negative things. So some of the things that you can do, Dr. Bell has been touching on it, she's been looking at my notes: culturally competent therapy. One of the things is culturally competent therapy. Spaces where you have that you can go and express and let it out. Spaces where blackness is affirmed, where it's not denied, where you don't have to necessarily explain every single thing. Advocating and collective action. Coming together, talking, and seeing if you can do something about it. Boundaries against performative inclusion and intergenerational dialogue and cultural restoration. I went ahead and looked that up for everybody. Now, I'm going to make this quick. We can make this another episode, but out of those things, and we'll each pick one, is there anyone that resonated with you or that you would love to share to those who are listening that they can take this to use to try to heal or present some restorative energy to themselves as they navigate and go through this? Would y'all like me to go first? That's all.
I'm not sure if you said this or not, but I think it's so important to name it and call it what it is. I think that so often, because it's so baked into our culture and our society that we are navigating, it makes you feel less than and degraded and all these things, and that can start to make you feel truly like there's something wrong with you, that there's a personal deficit that you have. And when you're operating from that space, all of the other symptoms that you talked about, they are heavier.
Yes.
So when you are able to take that and create the space that, you know what, that is actually what this is and what I'm dealing with, it feels differently. So I think that one's like step one for me.
Okay.
Community.
Community.
I think that's one of the biggest ones, because when things are going on, too much is going on, it's so easy to be siloed off and just kind of be stuck in yourself and your thoughts. And the thing is, when you kind of stuck in your thoughts, you ruminate and you start cycling. So things get 10 times worse. Towards when you end up around your family, your friends, whomever your village or your community is, one, it opens up a door to where you realize you're not the only one. But then two, and it's the reason why it's important to make sure you pick a positive circle, they give you perspectives that may actually be more uplifting.
Right.
And they remind you that you're not alone. And that camaraderie is built. And not to mention feeding off of each other's energy and realizing that, we don't have to be complicit in these feelings. There's things that we can do. What do you think we should do? And start collaborating. That's how any real major movement has ever occurred, is when people got out of the silos and came together and started talking about what was they feeling, what they were experiencing, and then from there getting motivated and forming action plans.
I like that. Name it in community. One I will share is, because I take a brain-based approach to therapy, I would say you do have to unplug occasionally, and you do have to take some time to yourself. Get out, go for a walk, and get some fresh air. Get the oxytocin into your system to calm your stress level down. So I am a big fan of meditation for mindfulness, or even just concentrative prayer if that is your thing. Because what happens is when you don't turn the stress levels off, or at least down, it becomes a greater problem later on. The more you're in a stressful state, the easier it is to get back in that state, because that state becomes your base. I like that you said name it, because yes, naming what you're dealing with automatically teaches the brain to regulate it, because now I know exactly what I'm dealing with. And getting with community, I think community is a great idea, because as you get with community, you get dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, epinephrine whenever you're around people. Those are the feel-good chemicals. You instantly start to feel better. When you're in community, you're in fellowship, people who tend to hang around in groups longer, they live longer. You live longer when you get in community, you have fellowship. So I think those three are really good ideas that you can use as you navigate your black fatigue. Because all three of us, brothers, sisters, and others, we feel you. We tired too. We tired. That brings us to the end of our episode, everybody. Hope you got something out of this. Remember, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Click that bell icon for you to get notifications when we put out a new episode. And we'll see you here again at For Us Therapeutics with Dr. B.
Dr. LaKeith.
Dr. Gigi.